The #1 rated woman in the world is Judit Polgar, one of the 3 Polgar sisters. So she's rated 2701, but she's had some inactivity actually. If we have a look at her rating profile, let's see, if we click on graph, you'll see that okay, this September 13 games, May 11, but there's a few years, I think, having children, she's been preoccupied with other stuff. So she's back and she's taken out the top seed in the World Cup. So let's have a look at that game. Before we have a look at that game, let's remind ourselves Karjakin Sergey is ranked 5 in the world on the current rating list, 2772. Born in 1990, still a young guy, one of the youngsters on the top of the list. And at 2772, he's only second in Russia to Kramnik. Okay, let's get on to the game now. Okay, Judit playing white kicked off with e4 against Sergey, and he played e5 after knight f3 Nc6, classic royal pairs, bishop b5. So this very solid knight f6 was a favourite of Kramnik as well. Berlin, I think, defense. Knight takes e4, and after d4, we have here an invitation by black, in effect, to get the queens off in the main line. After knight d6, we have bishop c6. Black takes with the centre pawn usually, and after d takes e5, an invitation to have the queens off, and leaving black with the bishop pair. So Kramnik and Sergey probably maybe even colluding together to analyse this variation. Very solid variation. So Judith's brilliant culture at home with her other 2 sisters, all excellent players, all coached from a very young age. She took the queens off here with queen takes d8. After king takes d8. So how does white get a small advantage out of this? Her first move is actually knight c3. So knight c3, not committing the bishop to, say, b3 yet. Knight c3 also means like knight e4 would be useful, maybe to attack bishop on c5, and maybe to threaten to come into g5, which might provoke something like h6 later from black. Okay, king e8. There were other moves in this position I think I've seen, like bishop d7 and trying to shuffle the king over to the queen side. But king e8 was played. After h3, some restraint basically on white playing g4 now. Black plays h5. So restraining against g4, otherwise the rook would be dangerously active, and this pawn would be terribly weak as well. So h3 though has some other perks. It gives some space for the king. Rook d1 and then bishop e7. So black is looking very, very solid. How is black going to be broken down here? Knight e4 is a logical follow-up from knight c3. So knight's nicely parked here. Difficult to evict because that square f5 is being used by the knight. So bishop d7, which might have the implication of c5 and bishop c6 later, to try and evict the knight from the central square. b3 now, so putting the bishop, committing the bishop potentially to this diagonal to overprotect e5. Cross that diagonal is quite nice. h4 sealing the g pawn, and also giving space sometimes. That might be useful. h5 to use that square as well. Okay, now here a very interesting decision. It looked as though this next move was going to put the bishop somewhere like bishop b2 next to overprotect e5, but actually something has changed in the position here. The h4 move maybe does create a sort of weakness of the last move here, and Judit actually maybe senses that and plays this next move, bishop g5. So a bit of pressure on h4, an invitation to get off the dark square bishops, which might weaken other dark squares in the future, these 3 squares in particular, or these 4. Rook d8 and now c4. So c4 puts potentially restraints on black after c5. If black ever plays c5, those 2 pawns will still be fixed. b6. Now rook d2. So it looks as though white's got a comfortable position, just working with the only kind of semi-open file in the position, this d file, just logically giving the impression of doubling up rooks. After bishop c8, an invitation to trade off rooks. So black is clearly content to try for a draw, maybe win as white in the next game in their pair of games. Judith's not so frightened of exchanging rooks, even though it looks as though maybe her winning chances could be dissipating. She does take the rook after king takes d8, rook d1 check. The king just shuffles back to e8. So black's saying, come and get me, I'm really sorry, what are you going to do? Well, bishop f4 is a hint that something might be up on these dark squares. These pawns happen to be on dark squares. If white can try and use this bishop to attack these pawns, maybe that is the fundamental vulnerability of the black position here. And in fact, it is seized on now, because black actually in this position perhaps was discouraged from a simple looking blockade, bishop e6, because maybe knight g5 would be annoying. Black played c5, which seems to allow, from the evidence of the game, a powerful temporary pawn sacrifice here. e6. So this gives scope for this bishop to start munching these pawns actually. So bishop takes e6, bishop takes c7. All of these pawns on dark squares. Okay, black has got the dark square bishop, but this bishop is now threatening immediately bishop b8. So this gives hope for the player of white that there can be a significant tangible advantage, even if you have to first take off the opponent's double pawn. If you have to get access to a really exploitable weakness, which might be these other two, that's the price to be paid maybe, to undouble black's pawns. f6 and now real pressure, bishop b8, so white's really carved out an advantage. After a6, bishop a7, skewering these pawns on the dark squares. But for the moment bishop d8 defends b6, but now there's ruthless energetic play against this pawn chain. Knight c3, immediate threats like knight a4 to try and target b6, and if b5, then this pawn will be weak. And this happens. b5 is ruled out here. If bishop d7 to try and stop knight a4, then maybe knight d5 will do the trick, still attacking b6. So it's difficult to stop an attack on b6, it seems here. King f7 and now knight a4. So white's increasing that advantage, trying to forcibly win a pawn from the number 5 in the world. After b5 she has succeeded, but her c4 is dropping off. Surely not the case. If b takes c4, then knight takes e6 followed by b takes c4. So she's a clear pawn up here. Bishop c8, but black does have the two bishops, but they seem to be passive on the back row here. C takes b5, and now this is a nice little mini strategic plan being carried out of creating a dangerous outside past a pawn, a4. So the small advantage is, well, it's going to be a much clearer advantage. So b takes, a real pass pawn up, but black's going to be very resourceful about this to try and stop that pawn or generate counterplay. Rook b1. What's the idea of rook b1? Well, there's entry points being created. Bishop b6 is facilitated if needed. Maybe rook b8 is going to be useful, but not in this situation at the moment. Or is it? The rook hasn't got an access to e1 at the moment because the knight's defending e1. So let's see from the evidence of the game. g5, bishop b6. Okay. So bishop b6 of course means there's no barriers in the way of this a pawn queening. The knight's actually quite good on c5, stopping any bishop b7s as well, for this a pawn to be interrupted. So bishop e7, now the a pawn is ruthlessly pushed, a5, and black wanting to make sure a6 is not possible, loses the dark square bishop here, loses the bishop pair, bishop c5, and make sure again a6 is going to be out of the question, setting up a light square blockade. It's tried to be broken even at the cost of further simplification, rook b6. Okay, and we have a situation also with opposite coloured bishops. So is black really still banking on a draw? You know, maybe. Knight g7 and now bishop e3. I think this introduces the idea it's blocking access to e1, which means maybe knight d4 is going to be a menace. So after knight f5, okay, rook b8, e3 is on the fire, so something has to be done by white. Or does it now? Now that the rook is committed to the bishop. Rook a8. A surprising move. Rook a8, even though it's blocking the a pawn, has a perk to it of rook a7 check. Powerful rook on the 7th. So after bishop b7 now, rook a7, rook e7. Can black be broken down here? Can this a pawn be carried or not? Maybe it's premature to push at the moment. Bishop c5 first, now a6. So we have here a further simplification of rooks. So rook takes, bishop takes. Now a7, there's bishop c6. So actually Judit pulls on the pressure now with knight d2. Up to king e6, knight c4. So a king d5 here would be answered with knight b6 check. So bishop c6, and now knight b6, keeping a wall for the king to be stopped coming in. Okay, so knight d6, and now even further simplification, cashing out that passed a pawn for a different advantage, believe it or not. After a7, a7 at the moment is going to be good, but Judit first takes on d6 and then plays a7. So it looks to be winning a piece, but the knight is going to be spectacularly stranded on a8. So even though the passed pawn did temporarily win material, it looks as though, what has Judit done? But this is a winning king and pawn ending, and a beautiful final move. Gives a very artistic impression of this final position. f4, and black has to resign here. f4, just weakening black's pawn chain a little bit, and also simultaneously giving rise to a maneuver like this to win g5. Black will be too far away. Let's have a quick look at that. So say king takes, f takes, king f2. The black king is just too far away to do anything about pawns being lost. And if taking, then that would be an easy mop up job here. If black took, just mop up the pawns. So you have to take this first. Pawns just get mopped up. Again, f6 is just too late. Even f6 can be munched. And then h4, two connected passed pawns. So this game shows you can break down even the most solid defense, even if Kramnik and Sergey may have got together on this variation. There's a way for white to get a small advantage. There's something about black's position and Achilles' heel in black's position in this variation. Seems to be, as demonstrated by this game, the pawns potentially on dark squares, pawns on the queen side. So white's small piece development initiative can actually be translated into something, it seems, from the evidence of this game. Very super solid play by black. Looks as though black has hardly made any errors, and the room for errors seems to be well down as well due to the solidity of the position. The queen's off, black having the bishop pair. Black's only real visual issue seems to be the double pawns, but there's something very, very clever about this b3 move. Gives the impression the bishop was going to b2, but in fact after h4 the decision was made. Bring the bishop now to g5, and after rook d8 c4 it seems something encouraged black to play b6, which puts quite a few pawns on dark squares. If black doesn't play b6, then maybe there's going to be a bind with c5, because this knight's supporting c5. Maybe that was what black was worried about. So b6 looks like a logical move anyway from the point of view of c5, bishop c6 possibilities as well. So we have here rook d2, bishop c8, so the bishop can still get onto that diagonal. Now rook takes d8, exchanging off rooks, check. Now here, this bishop f4, I suppose it makes use of this advanced pawn actually, that if it can be traded off, okay, undoubling black's c pawns. So the question is bishop e6, was that actually one of the better moves? Actually, let's just engine check this position just for interest. Was white actually slightly better here from an engine point of view? 0.30. So after c5, knight c3 is actually recommended by e6 is second best. Apparently knight c6. I don't know. Sorry, knight c3. But e6 is given as a nice move as well. So okay, here I don't know what actually the idea would be of knight c3. Let's just quickly check this variation. Or maybe it's to threaten knight d5. So c6, then just simply go back to e4. Typical computer idea. Just create a slight weakness. So this is a more committal approach, this e6. Really wanting, in effect, to undouble black's pawns to gain access to a more exploitable weakness. Otherwise, it's kept under lock and key. b6 and a7. So, undoubling black's pawns first, getting rid of also the dangerous looking e pawn on e5, so losing white's wedge, but it does also gain a bit of access to d6. So f6, trying to get the king to f7 to get the rook into the game on the first rank. But now there's trouble. Trouble has brewed in this position for this pawn chain. So a6, bishop a7, the start of forcibly winning a pawn. With this manoeuvre, knight a4, and the rank 5 in the world is starting to go down in this position as the outside passed a pawn is created. Rook b1, a fine move for supporting bishop b6, it seems, principally, with the idea then of simply a5 and a6. g5, not such a big deal because h3 was also making sure any g4s from black are ruled out still. So bishop b6, and the a pawn takes a step further forward. Black now radically tries to set up a light square blockade and maybe banking on the opposite coloured bishops. So even after another rook invitation exchange is declined here actually, rook b8. But now the rooks do come off. Massive simplification. So after all that, does white have a significant advantage? Knight d2, so putting knight and bishop together to create a wall against the black king here. Knight c4. almost. If once the knight gets to b6, there'll be the wall. Actually, pardon me. For the moment, king d5 is logically ruled out because of knight b6 check. Then knight takes d7, then a7. So bishop c6, and now knight b6, creating that wall against the black king. Knight d6, and now final simplifications, leading beautifully to just a winning king and pawn ending with this strike f4. Beautiful play from Judit, the #1 woman player in the world. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.